Another thing that we can do here to kind of increase the realization or the depth perception of this game is adding scenery. So one of the things that we're going to look at here is just to add scenery. When we're looking at adding scenery, one of the things that we want to look at first is we're going to use this tree here. So we have this sprite of a tree, and what we want to do is we want to actually have this do something, and what we're going to have it do is change its projection or size as we move closer to the finish line, again giving you that feeling of motion. So what we're going to do is going underneath that, what we want to do is we want to set our tree to a certain location, and in this case we're going to use -50. Use -50, 20, and again we're going to do the same thing by changing by a percentage. So what we want to do is we want to change size by, so going into looks we want to change size by, and we're going to do a nice percentage because that keeps it nice and consistent with that of the finish line. So we're going to do 1%. And by doing so, now we're going to line that tree right up with that of the, or next to that of the finish line. So we're going to be changing by 1%. And the nice thing is that we used our command, or our signal, and by doing so now that we have the receive signal, so we're going to receive start. And what we want to do is we want to actually use the same line of code here that we used for the tree here. So waiting until the distance has in the left and right function, and changing by and changing that size. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually duplicate that whole line of code, and we're going to plop it right there in the tree. The only thing that appears that didn't copy over was the repeat until function. So we're going to repeat until, again having that big piece here, waiting, repeat until distance equals 100. So again, going back into our data, we're looking for distance, so distance equals 100 here, and then the left and right arrow. Okay, so again we're looking at that change in those until, so it also looks like some other piece didn't quite copy over, which is the wait until piece, which is fine. So again, wait until, and then in this case we're going to be touching or pressing the key of, so key pressed. In this case the only one that didn't seem to copy over was the left arrow piece. So we have our left arrow, okay, and then we're going to change size by, right arrow, change size by. Okay, again we can take out this distance piece because we already have the distance taken into consideration for the other pieces, so we can actually throw that right out because that's underneath that of the finish line. So again, here you're going to start running, and you can see that the tree is getting larger, but it appears that the tree stops at a certain location. So let's go back and look into the coding for that. So now we look at that, change by -1. So what we need to do now is we need to actually make the tree move away from the track slightly. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a little adjustment. So we're going to change the y by -1.5, but we're also going to have to change the x because it appears that it starts moving into the track. So what we want to do is we want to change the x by, and in this case did the math, and it's going to be about -2. Okay, so we're going to be looking at -2, and we also want to repeat that same variable for that of the other arrow. So now we're going to be looking at -2 as well. So now when we look at this, we have the repeat until 100. So we're looking at left arrow or not left arrow, 1, -1.5, -2. And then right arrow, not right arrow, 1, 1.5, and -2. And we're going to try that out here. So we're going to see what happens. So as you start running, now it appears that the tree goes to a certain distance. But see, what the problem is that we have a repeat until 10. So that might be the problem of why that stops there. So now we change that to 100, just doing a little troubleshooting. We can see now that the tree appears to be actually smack dab in the middle of the race, which doesn't seem to be quite right. So let's look at our variables here. Changing by negative, set x to -2, set x to -2, right, -50, -20. And we'll have to go back and look at that piece in particular. So we have an error someplace in our line of code here as we go through just troubleshooting this. You can see that once the distance gets ahead of 8, it appears that the tree decides to make a dramatic shift to the middle of the track, changing that by too large of a value. So let's stop that. We'll just test this piece here. And you can see that the tree appears to be set too far in the middle of the arena or the course here. So let's offset this a little bit farther, not being -50, but say -100 over 20. And let's give that a go here. So you can see that, again, it appears that the tree sets there, but then appears to kind of hop over into the track itself. Looking at some of our variables, the tree you can see is at 0. So if we're at -50 over 20, you can see that there's a discrepancy in the right click. You can see that it appears to move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth after its initial movement, but there seems to be a problem with a jump there. So what we're going to do is we're going to click out of this and switch over to that of the finish line. And again, it seems that there's a error there in the data calculation. So we'll go back in the next step and we'll check that out and see if we can't change those numbers around to get a better value.